In continuing the series on how I ended up with Ruth Cannon in my life, Ruth Cannon likes to tell the story that it was through the Stories of the Forecourts blog, but we had previous contact when Ruth Cannon used to run her now deleted or original sibling of Daedalus account. By Ruth's own admission, Ruth only got in touch with me, or when she was in early contact with me, it wasn't to help me. It was because Ruth thought I was some sort of op or trick by Izzy Kamikaze and her group of people on the internet. As Ruth and John Ryan had clashed with Izzy and that group over Dara Quigley's death and the video attached to that. As we've seen, maybe if you looked at Bad Guard, Dara Quigley is a thing that Ruth continually used to manipulate me. According to Izzy Kamikaze, John Ryan and Dara Quigley were very close, and that Izzy has said that John loved Dara Quigley. And I don't know the full ins and outs there, except for it's a constant point of reference and obsession by Ruth Cannon, who watches Dara's now defunct Facebook, wondering who maintains it, which is creepy in and of itself. And Dara Quigley was I didn't know Dara, and I didn't know really much about it. But Dara Quigley became a point of manipulation, psychological manipulation with Ruth. When I would, I am diagnosed by several doctors as having a severe and quite debilitating post-traumatic stress disorder. And Ruth would, when I would have PTSD crisis or dysregulation, Ruth would often try and manipulate those by telling me that, if I did die or if anything happened to me, that my a family would take the narrative and rewrite everything and control it like they did with Dara, which I think is really toxic and weird and creepy and unhealthy and dangerous. But Ruth Cannon's first phone call with me was she led with by gaining trust and closeness by saying that she, Ruth Cannon, had also been abused by her mother. But Ruth would run two lines in that, like a very sort of skilled gaslight, where she would simultaneously try and quash or dismiss anything I said regarding child abuse by being like, I was also abused. But at the same time using that as a sort of a way to maintain trust and closeness or shared experience. But at the same parallel then, and this was the one that became more overwhelming and ever present, Ruth would became obsessed with telling me that I hadn't been abused and that the audio I had, like, wasn't real, or and running bizarre interference for Terry Madden, the social worker, who is recorded admitting to child abuse. And but that became a key point, and I'm just reiterating this part of the early contact with Ruth to show the extreme psychological abuse that was there from the beginning. I don't know why Ruth was obsessed with that, but she did later say that talk to me kind of in depth about how manipulating my post-traumatic stress disorder to get reactions that were favorable or usable. So, that might be it. Ruth Cannon came to me when I was, as I mentioned in the other parts of this, very isolated and very vulnerable and in recovery, and recovered from very serious suicide attempt due to the Kevin Street Gardaí's fraud, bad faith, malicious prosecution, abusive process, and harassment and the violence I'd suffered at their hands. And very quickly began making it a point of distress, all the way into November and December of 2020. The first one was she would make me do very distressing and strange mind exercises. This is like very distressing, constantly asking me to write and rewrite what advice I would give to myself. Very harrowing and distressing and abusive stuff. But what if you talk to you, what would you tell you? And I'm like, this doesn't do anything for the issue. At the same time, during this, Ruth would hint that she knew my family, um, hint of more knowledge. At the same time as Ruth was basically mining me for information, and taking advantage of my vulnerable state and my isolation. And this whole period, Ruth still thought I was the enemy or one of Izzy Kamikaze's, agents or something that somehow meant her harm, as Ruth holds a lot of loathing and hatred for Izzy Kamikaze and that attached group of people. And it's all linked into the Dara Quigley death. And besides blurted comments and comments by Izzy and stuff, I don't really know the full ins and outs there, except that it was an obsessive, repeated point of manipulation and reference by Ruth Cannon. And it very clearly was one used to manipulate me into being more pliant and doing what she wanted, or just being in a position where she would be listened to, or I would be disarmed through confusion and the emotional manipulation. And all of that period was September 2020 into early December 2020. And all the way through that period as well, Ruth kept asking me, did I want to speak to John Ryan? And I know I've gone over this, but it bears repeating, because this is stuff that Ruth has said on the stand never happened. However, as can be seen on badguard.com, I have posted repeated screenshots of conversations that Ruth said never happened. But I was on hunger strike, and I was incredibly isolated, because those sort of court cases, they tend to isolate you. And I was also struggling with a very abusive, narcissistic parent who, I had discovered from my medical records, had lied to a hospital with the guards, allegedly, that to tell them that to get me falsely imprisoned by telling the hospital that my time in Finland was a delusion. All of these things, these points that needed ironing out, and such, Ruth obstructed access to, and obstructed my path to the law, and that includes, as I previously mentioned, trying to talk me out of using legal aid, denigrating legal aid, and basically obstructing and creating a sort of a miasma of confusion and distress around it, while at the same time trying to center herself. But really all Ruth was doing was mining information and abusing. It wasn't until late January that anything of substance arrived. And it was during this period that Ruth Cannon tried to convince me to plead guilty to things that never happened. And I will follow this up with an episode of how Ruth Cannon dealt with Michael Hanaho and such. But again, the screenshots are all there, the audios are all there. I cannot really stress how people think I'm making it up or anything. But this is a person who targeted, and it would appear, based on the comments that I have logged, that Ruth Cannon and John Ryan targeted me, and I think there's some sort of rejection sensitivity in the background there, because I wanted nothing to do with John Ryan. But Ruth kept asking and asking, would I speak to John Ryan? Would you want to speak to my partner? My partner is very intelligent. Then she would start to refer, my partner is a genius. He's the only genius I know, and all this. You should speak to my partner. And it's all got very weird. But that really is just the September into October period. And it gets way weirder and way darker through October into November, and way more abusive and controlling. But people would have to remember that I went like weeks and months where the only thing I said was a pouch of tobacco, please, because I was very isolated and extremely traumatized. And this is just a fragment of the beginning of how Ruth Cannon forced her way into my life, like a psychologically abusive predator. And it happens, I suppose. So, but I'm going to cut this, and then I will resume with Michael Hanna bits and October. These images are just the ones that are in the slideshow. I just thought I'd add this. They're fragments of not, and they're not even really out of context, but they might be a bit shuffled in the slideshow to show both the constant reference by Ruth Cannon to Dara Quigley, the constant manipulative reference, Ruth's involvement in my legal issues, Ruth's control of access to Richard Young. All of these things Ruth lied about on the stand under oath. Ruth's continued reference to John Ryan. There are quite a number of screenshots of Ruth asking me that I want to speak with him. There's also the Rivita diet screenshot, which has led to me to filing the obstruction, defamation, and abuse civil case against Ruth, which led things to here. I can provide a much more extensive version of the conversations, all of which are logged, should it be required at the moment. However, I'm just placing these as a sort of a reference point to show that, or to at least let people know kind of what I was dealing with. These aren't even the most manipulative or the worst or the darkest, but these are early enough days. These are, so, enjoy the slideshow.